This is Marketing Uncomplicated. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Today, I have Bill Rice, who is a seasoned entrepreneur and marketing expert with over 20 years of experience in lead generation, digital marketing, and business growth. His journey began in counterespionage as an Air Force officer. Super interesting transition, Bill, and can't wait to get into that. So before transitioning into the business world, that's what he was doing, where he has also successfully built and sold multiple companies. As the founder of Kaleidico, and we'll get into the naming of the business name, and Bill Rice Strategy Group, he specializes in helping fintech companies develop effective lead generation strategies and optimize their sale operations. His expertise spans from the early days of digital marketing pre-Google and Facebook to modern AI-driven marketing solutions. Welcome to the show, Bill. We're really excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have the conversation.
Yes. So I actually want to start off and talk about how did your time at the Air Force shape your approach to business and marketing? Because I always like to see the differentiation of how some marketing agencies have this very narrow focus, which is fintech, and which is your focus. So I really want to, see how your experience within the Air Force has really kind of pulled into your life today.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is kind of probably a unique journey, but there is certainly some threads that pull through the entire thing. So in my time in the Air Force, even in that time, I started out flying and then transitioned into counterintelligence. During that time, it was kind of interesting and unique. I ended up in a sort of a specialized unit inside of Air Force Office of Special Investigations, which generally is sort of does major investigations in crime, sort of roughly, the way I always equate it is sort of roughly equivalent to the Air Force's FBI, if you will. And inside of the FBI, which we often collaborated with, and inside of the Air Force, we had this unique division that did counterintelligence operations, counterespionage. And we were essentially running operations in order to kind of suss out and detect espionage against the Air Force in particular and Air Force assets. And so kind of without getting into too many of the details, but to kind of pull the thread through, one of the basis of that or any sort of counterintelligence, particularly where I was positioned, which was in the early days of transitioning a lot of intelligence type activities to a very early internet, right? So very early digital internet sort of things, and some of the traditional intelligence activities were transitioning into that digital space. And so pattern recognition is probably one of the key factors that starts to thread together on this. We were looking at signals intelligence. We were looking at signatures on the internet, communications, and determining where activity was and potentially what was going on and when we needed to be aware of things. From there, I left the Air Force and transitioned through essentially the revolving door. And I ended up on the civilian side of that equation, and working as a consultant in one of the many consultant agencies that support government organizations inside the Beltway, and worked for several of the known sort of intel agencies. And in that moment, became more refined in what we were doing. And so we were building some of the early information warfare capabilities, again, more and more moving to the internet. So I was there at kind of the inception of the internet. And then when I fully decided to transition into the civilian world, I somewhat by accident, because whenever you're sort of repositioning your skills for a different industry or whatever, you kind of look for a spot that looks similar. And so I repositioned as an internet security expert and ended up in the banking industry. And I did that for a short time, doing a lot of intrusion detection and early sort of protecting the internet bank. We were one of the first in this group. We were one of the first to build an internet-only bank. So again, the thread to the internet. And then through that process, like you mentioned, I was pre-Google, pre-Facebook. I remember, and this is kind of one of my origin tales that I love to tell. So we were part of this internet-only bank. Most of our marketing, quite honestly, was putting rate tables in the business section of newspapers.
Rate
But
tables in the business section of newspaper.
right. So
Okay.
Bankrate,
Yeah.
a lot of people have heard of Bankrate. Bankrate's
Hmm.
original sort of business model was to place these little lending and CD rate tables inside the business section, and then there would be a URL, and you would go there and you could get your CD, or you could go there and you could get your home equity loan, which is what we were lending. Um, then one of our developers kind of walked into my office and said, "Hey, take a look at this thing." And he showed me a white screen with a box in the middle of it. And he
Yeah.
said, "You just like type in some words in here and it gives you all these results." And I was like, "That kind of looks like Yahoo directory. Like, why wouldn't you?" Anyway, so that was the early part of Google. And then from there, my whole world started to be wrapped around generating leads online. And
Hmm.
again, the thread is detecting, looking at patterns, user behavior in order to sort of get those people and those behaviors to our products and services and turn them into leads for sales teams. So somewhat of a long and wandering path, but there is a little bit of a thread there.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'm sure until you looked at it today, it was kind of like an unconscious like buildup into, where your path was kind of leading. And I love that you bring up this concept of pattern recognition that you experienced when you were working in the Air Force that really transitioned nicely into the internet world. I mean, that is just pure magic right there.
Oh yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is, and I say all the time that I never took a job that I was qualified for. So
Yeah.
curiosity is a big part of that too. Just being kind of curious as to what you're looking at, and potentially looking at some of those patterns or some of those emerging technologies and trends, and saying, "Hey, what can I do with this?" And that served me well throughout the years.
Yeah, no, I love that. So just to take a little bit of a step back into the first internet bank, I mean, how cool was that to be like it's almost like I envy people that were in the digital space because I've been in the marketing world for about 22 years. So I think
Mhm.
you and I have kind of moved into this wave, but I didn't transition onto the business side until much later. I was working on the design side as a graphic designer. So I really envy those folks that were a little older that kind of penetrated into the internet world that really today can see how it's really shifted and
Yeah,
scaled from back then because I mean the stories are just are incredible and we don't realize how much has changed so quickly.
yeah,
So this was a bank that you guys scaled to 1 billion, which was incredible for that time.
yeah.
In terms of, your experience there, what did you learn from building something so ahead of its time, really?
Yeah. Well, and it was even not only in the internet bank space, but also in the home equity space, which essentially kind of went away for 20 years. A lot of economic reasons for that, and now is resurging. And essentially, what we built back between 2000 2004 has kind of reemerged with companies like Figure, who are kind of looked at and are like super leading edge, innovative fintech companies. But we were kind of doing the early version of that, and really it was at that time what was interesting is there probably mortgage, which is still a primary sort of industry that I work in a lot. Mortgage was probably one of the leaders in seeing that consumers wanted the convenience of being able to go to the internet, look at products and rates, and give their information to start the process. So
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
more consumer direct sort of exposure. And so that's what we did. We looked at the internet as a little bit of a blank canvas, and we said, well, they're interested in starting the conversation on the internet or doing some research before they feel confident enough to have that conversation, particularly in mortgage, because it's an infrequent transaction. So a lot of people, even today, need to prep that with a little research. And we were able to realize that research, that moment of research, if you just ask them for their information,
Yeah.
they're ready to go. They were like,
Yeah.
okay, I've done my research. Let me talk to somebody now. And that was the early stage. And the first thing that we did was kind of create a web form. And again, unless you were there, you don't realize, like today, we like autofill web forms without even thinking about it.
Immediately. And then it's like our cookies also just auto populate.
Exactly. But we, at the time, we literally had instructions next to the web form to help people understand how to fill out this very linear, set of like 20 or so boxes. That was just so like archaic if you were to look at it now. But
Yeah.
the consumer needed help. They didn't know how to fill it out. They didn't know what was going to happen from that. And then we processed that data, which is another thing that was really unusual at that time. We processed the data and we gave them an offer. And one of the weird things, not to go down too many of these things, but they are kind of fun stories. One of the things we found out really quickly is we were getting information from again, things that are very common today. We were taking their information, we were reaching out to the credit bureaus, we're getting a sense of what their credit score was, we were verifying some additional information. And then very quickly, in a matter of seconds, and we thought this was important because we're on the internet, people had a lot more patience back then. But it would happen very quickly. And so a lot of times they would abandon. And we found out that they didn't think it was real. They didn't think that the offer was real. So, and this seems absurd now, but we actually slowed the process down. We created this little kind of rotating wheel that said, hey, we're processing your application. And at one point we slowed it down as slow as 2 minutes so that they felt like
something was happening on the back end.
There was something happening. And I think most of them at that time thought that there was a human. And that actually converted better than giving them the instant offer. Now, over the years, we sped that up significantly. But yeah, at first it's like, so that goes back to the pattern recognition. Like when you're doing marketing, it's really important to kind of look at the behaviors that are happening and try to sort of understand what's happening on the other side of the screen. And in that particular case, they just, it felt too magical. So we had to do some things to make that experience more comfortable.
Yeah, no, incredibly interesting. And also even more so that, that it was enticing to have, the system slower because somebody felt like there was a human behind it. And it's like now consumers have become so much more smarter that they're like, they want instant gratification immediately. So the purchasing power and the mindset has just completely become different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So looking back, you have been generating leads before social media even existed. And since we're talking a lot about like through lines, I do want to discuss the similarities of what, of generating leads still exists today. Like what is still, similar, but then obviously, what is different?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, to some degree, it's kind of funny that over the last 20 years, like the concept of the lead hasn't really changed that much on on the back end or the delivery. We're collecting, roughly 10 to 20 pieces of information. And when I say lead generation, there's really two kind of facets, right? There's the B2C, which we do on the Kaleidico side. And then on the Bill Rice strategy side, we do more B2B. Those worlds are coming closer together, but they are, still different. But in essence, the lead itself is a data lead, collecting some information. The consumer seems to still be really comfortable with that. If you were to give them, this is a mistake a lot of founders of young companies make. They say, oh, because somewhere along the line they were told, oh, if you ask them less questions, they will convert at a higher rate, or you'll get a higher throughput. And to some degree, that's okay if you're talking about that old style linear form. And you still see a lot of that on the B2B side, and to some degree it is effective. But on the consumer side, actually they want to feel like they're moving into the process. And so we use more of a survey style or a progressive form where you're asking them one question at a time, and they're just making, a multiple choice sort of question. And that's really effective. You can collect a lot of information. It really prepares the salesperson to have a good conversation.
Yeah.
And it helps you do all kinds of lead scoring and grading and all that kind of stuff. So to some degree, the front end, the user experience, and how we collect that information has definitely matured over time. But the back end, the actual result of the lead, the data is very similar and continues to kind of, I think will persist that way for a little while, because again, the consumer likes a human in the middle, right? There is probably a world in which all of the information they give us, it is essentially already available. Like we could probably like pre-populate most of these things, but that would be a scary experience, much like sort of underwriting and giving an offer to them back in 2000 and sub-second, to just pre-populate and say, hey, I know who you are, Bill Rice.
Yeah.
even though that's possible, is probably still a little bit too scary.
Yeah, we're most likely, I think, moving in that direction. I mean, because I remember when, inputting your social security was scary for a lot of people,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And I think even still today, my dad's like, I mean, 82 young, he's like, I can't believe you put your social security number in there. And I'm like, a social security number is no more. I
Yeah.
mean, there's so much data on people, to your point, on the net, that it's like, it's not that it's not secured, it's just that it's a known thing, right? It's
Right.
something that can be found super easily, and we won't go in this direction, but I mean, the dark web has so much detail
Oh
on
my gosh. Yeah.
everybody,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
um I want to pause before we dive further, and I want to just talk about the differentiation between your two companies, Kaleidico and Bill Rice.
Mhm.
And then obviously let's talk about the naming of Kaleidico, but let's talk about the differentiation of the two.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kaleidico is something I started soon after the internet bank, and then a brief stint at Quicken Loans, which is now Rocket Mortgage, where I did some similar things with home equity. So coming out of that, again, it was the early days of lead generation, and I realized that this industry was going to get big. There was, particularly on the mortgage side, which is where I started and still is kind of our primary vertical in that company, there's just an insatiable appetite for leads to feed these origination machines like Rocket and that sort of thing. So I kind of came out of that experience, those two companies, and I said, hey, still early days. I know how to generate leads, and our positioning was a little bit different. A lot of the agencies that served that lead generation did just that. They generated leads on their own sites, and then they handed them out on a pay per lead basis, right?
Mm-hmm,
Charge them
mm-hmm,
25
mm-hmm.
bucks or 70 bucks or whatever. What we did instead is I thought it was crazy um, that there were industries that were completely dependent on buying leads. They didn't have marketing infrastructure at all. And so it seemed weird that you would have organizations that didn't have marketing as a core competency. But for me, as an agency building that, I was like, this is a marketing opportunity. So mortgage company, even today, mortgage companies, insurance companies, law firms, senior living communities, which are
Mm-hmm.
all verticals that we branched into. They are very much sales driven. Attorneys don't like to be called salespeople, but they are. Community directors at senior living are largely salespeople. Insurance people, obviously, are salespeople. Loan officers are salespeople, but they don't have the marketing infrastructure. But I thought it was important to have a core capability, even if I deliver it turnkey.
Yeah.
Like you should own the ability to predictably and sustainably feed yourself with leads. And so that's the service offering on the Kaleidico side. We come in there and we can turnkey start generating leads with a cold start.
Yeah.
Um, on the
And
Bill
why
Rice,
Kaleidico?
oh, why Kaleidico? Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is interesting. This is very much and I'm still passionate about founders and entrepreneurs and spend a lot of time with them. Um, so at the time when I left, I was like, I have some ideas, but I have no idea what this company is going to be. And so I and a couple of folks that started this with me um, somehow wandered into the concept of a kaleidoscope. And we were
I
like,
thought
hey,
so.
the
Yeah.
interesting thing about a kaleidoscope is you don't really know what it is, but if you manipulate it a little bit, you get some really neat. And I kind of like the pattern thing. Obviously, you can tell that
Mm-hmm,
that's a
mm-hmm.
passion
It's
of
your
mine.
through
So
line.
yeah. So there's a pattern
Even
thing.
on the back, if you guys are watching on YouTube, you'll see some pattern, the
Yeah.
artwork that Bill
Yep.
has in the
This
back.
is
Yeah.
this is actually my daughter's artwork. So
Very cool.
call out to
Still
her.
patterns run in the family.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, so we took Kaleidoscope and kind of manipulated it, became Kaleidico. In some senses, it felt like a horrible decision because nobody can pronounce it, nobody can spell it. But then in the early days, though, it actually started to work for us because a lot
Yeah.
of people would say, "I've heard of you." And I would, in the back of my mind, I would say, you absolutely have not, but you know what a kaleidoscope is, and you think you've
Yeah.
heard of us.
Yeah. That's
So
great.
yeah, so it kind of worked. It kind of worked nice.
S-
I wouldn't do it that way again.
Yeah.
And as you can see with Bill Rice Strategy, um, that was a little bit of a different entity. I started more recently, and it's really just because I wanted to spend more time on the strategy itself.
Mm-hmm.
I have a little bit of name recognition in the industries that I support, and essentially, when I built that agency, I stepped over to the vendor side of the equation. So all of the fintech, the technology companies, the people that are innovating solutions into these financial services companies. I loved working with them. I loved bringing their technology in. So I said, well, maybe I can serve them
Hmm.
and help them market to essentially kind of a similar audience, but on
Yeah.
the business to business side, and to get more of those, to push more of that technology innovation into the financial services market. And so that's where we spend most of our time in that agency.
Very cool. Very cool. So just transitioning a little bit, I love this point that you bring up in terms of believing in downturns are the best time to build business. And
Mhm.
I bring this up because I used to consult for a company that was supporting solo and small law firms, and they exploded during COVID.
Yeah.
And the companies or the law firms that stuck with the program, it was basically a support system and a coaching system to bring law firms from 250 to 500, a million plus.
Yeah.
And the ones that stuck and invested saw their fruition through COVID. So talk to us a little bit about why is that?
Yeah.
And how can founders make the most of a tough economy? Because I am 100% in agreement with you on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's all kinds of opportunities for founders in uh, chaos, uncertainty, downturns. Most of our headway was made in our industry around mortgage. What we Everybody else terms the financial crisis, we called it the mortgage meltdown.
Yeah.
And in that, we grew a lot because the interesting thing about marketing, and one of the reasons that I've always liked being in marketing, it's a little bit of a hard case for people to understand, but in good times, when leads are flowing, like for instance, again, I'll keep relating back to mortgage a little bit just because it's so familiar, but um, the mortgage industry thrives and survives on refinance booms, right? So we've been in this really sustained high interest rate environment. We've got a lot of people with very low interest rates. So the mortgage industry is essentially, for all intents and purposes, dead
Yeah.
because um, there are no scenarios in which refinancing makes a ton of obvious sense, right? So, but in these moments, um, the industries are generally innovating with, and we see this in the mortgage industry, innovating with new products. They're trying to meet the market, with what consumers do need, and then lenders need to aggregate all of these diverse scenarios because the core scenario, an obvious refinance, isn't there anymore. So unfortunately, the kind of the less sophisticated, in the moment that things get tight and business contracts, the first thing, for whatever reason, they lop off is marketing.
Hmm.
And in good times, a lot of times those leads flow to you because the product or the service need is obvious to the consumer or to the business and B2B. But in hard times, marketing, particularly digital marketing, is really good at going out and extracting whatever demand there is
Yeah.
and pushing it into you. So those who are smart about that um, do one of two things. They either don't drop as far, because there are some, in the financial crisis, everybody went zero, negative.
Yeah.
But at least those people that were continuing their marketing budgets had a sort of a softer landing, and they had a faster takeoff,
Yeah.
because these things are always cyclical. And so growth is there. And then to the founder and the entrepreneur point, just to kind of wrap that up, in those moments, businesses are looking for solutions. So
Yes. Yes. Yes.
founders that are quick and agile and hustle can
Yes.
get in there and build solutions much faster for a market that has entirely changed.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Well, and one of the things that I kind of want to put a pin in is that it's interesting when you look at let's say like an enterprise department, right? You have the
Mhm.
marketing department, you have the finance, you have revenue, you have product development, so on and so forth. The goals for each one of those departments are so linear and straightforward in comparison to like what marketers have to deal with market shifts, is that we may have set goals based on what our head of finance, is demanding, or our, CRO is demanding, or so on and so forth, and just the overall goals of the company. But what I don't think that a lot of people realize in terms of what marketers deal with is everyday shifts, everyday mindsets from consumers, how things are changing so quickly. And we're going to get into like a bunch of other things like AI and so on and so forth, but it is a wild ride. What marketers have to deal with on the back end, just, putting out that goal of we want to make X amount of revenue on a daily basis. We're like running on a hamster wheel for the next 30 days and then some that people don't tend to see. And it's like, and I want to raise this point because, for those of you that are marketers that are listening, it's important to know that marketers are hustling for you from that standpoint. And as a business owner, you have cycles, and that should be understood, but in essence it really isn't. It's just the concept, oh, you guys just put a bunch of Facebook ads up and create, some very interesting creative, and then, we get clicks. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, this is something that, in these moments, there probably is some sorting and stacking that needs to happen, right? Because if your marketing capability isn't hustling, isn't trying to figure things out, isn't, innovating and coming to you with like, hey, I think this, or resetting some of those forecasts, then you probably should be looking to make a change or push that group harder, whether it's in-house or agency. In these times, like particularly, we kind of alluded a little bit to AI and what it's doing in our industry, but if they're not talking about AI and they're not educating you as to how it's changing the marketing landscape, then you probably should be looking for some other strategic advice and voices in your marketing. So I do think as a business leader, you do need to hold marketing still accountable in these moments and make sure that you are moving and innovating and trying to figure things out in these moments. But if they're just sitting there static, then you're probably right to cut them. But don't cut the activity. Cut like what's not working, and that's always a good business leaders always knows that that's what they're supposed to be doing, is looking at what's working.
And that's a second point that I definitely wanted to bring up, is that just because times are tough, scale back, but don't cut and push out, right?
Sure.
And that's the thing, is that marketing always tends to be the first thing that gets cut. And that is the biggest mistake that you can do, is cut out if you're working with a contractor, or if you have, internal marketers that are supporting you, because the second you do that and you put the responsibility, especially when you're a small business, on somebody who doesn't necessarily know how it runs and how the cycle works, because it's like sometimes marketer just can do things in their sleep because it's like what they've been doing for X amount of years. You give it to somebody who's project managing and they're struggling to get something out that would normally take a half an hour. They're getting it out in 3 hours.
Right.
So you're hurting other parts of the businesses when you should just focus on, as I like to say, certain things are nice to have in marketing, but the components of the marketing channels in terms of how they all work together are effective. But there are things that become more nice to haves versus ones that really will have a return on investment for you. And so it's really zeroing in on that versus just completely cutting, and then stopping.
Right. Yeah. Because you'll get stuck, right? And all those divisions will be frustrated, right? Finance will be frustrated because revenue is not happening, because you cut the oxygen that is leads and transactions. Product will be frustrated because they've got something new and innovative, and they think that the market needs, but they have no way to put it out into the market, right? To position it and to have communication. So there are a lot of things that get trickle down impacted when you make significant changes to marketing.
Yeah. Let's transition a little bit into demand gen that works, right? So you've produced over 500,000 leads yearly for clients, which is amazing across the board. What separates a lead gen system that actually scales from one that fizzles out?
Yeah. So again, these, on both sides, and it's kind of neat because I get to look at both. So on the B2C side, it's a little bit different from B2B, even though, sometimes people try to oversimplify that and say, oh, we're still marketing to people, but it is different. The motivations and the demands are different. So on the B2C side, so marketing to consumers, really in some ways is fairly simplistic, in that most consumers, and there's all kinds of data to support this. However, this is changing, but there's some statistics that say, somewhere between 80 and 90% of all internet like traffic starts with a Google search. Right. So in essence, to create lead generation that's predictable and scalable and those sorts of things, you just need to get into the Google search. Obviously, Facebook is significant. So generally, what I call the easy button is to start with pay-per-click and to buy your way into those interactions, into those markets, into that targeting. These platforms have great targeting. You can kind of go right in there and you can test. This is particularly important for kind of newer organizations that are trying to figure out who their ICP is. You can use those paid channels. My first love is SEO and content. And so that is a way to sort of invest once you've sort of, the way we do it anyway, you sort of, and we do some of this with B2B as well. Once you've sort of identified and narrowed in on the ICP, then you can kind of scale it by investing in content. B2B, sort of the pathways are a little bit different. So we're looking to have conversation with leaders and roles that have budgets, right? And so a lot of our activity starts on LinkedIn, just one of the most obvious platforms, because you can quickly see, and that's what we're looking for. Like, again, and going back to the patterns, we're looking for platforms and channels where we can, as much as possible, get the features and characteristics that identify our ICPs, so we don't waste a lot of time and money figuring out who they are. And then from that, then again, we often transition into investing in content. So where things are changing in both of those entities. So that's how you get the leads flowing, right? You're buying your way in, you're getting the search, you're bringing them to content, you're giving them enough information to make them. And I look at it a little bit different. I think what we're trying to do is give them enough information to be confident in a discussion with a salesperson.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of people say, "Oh, I gotta I gotta educate them on every." They don't need to be educated on everything. They just need to be confident that they're not going to be taken advantage of, or confident that they have the right product or service. Same thing with B2B. I'm trying to get their attention in LinkedIn, and then I'm going to drive them to some content that, again, closes a little bit of a gap. So that they're confident in having a conversation with me, or they're confident that they're talking to the right person. And that really is lead generation. When we're talking about a data lead or an inbound phone call, that's really as simple as it is, right? You get their attention in places that they already are. You convince them with content that they're in the right place and that they should feel confident in going into that sales conversation. And then we connect them with a salesperson on both of those fronts. And that really is like the most simplistic, customer journey that we build over and over and over again.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a system that works, right?
Yeah.
Where do you see that most demand generation strategies go wrong, though?
I think when we try to get too cute, honestly. So one of the most sort of frustrating conversation that I often have is, we're generating hundreds of leads or thousands of leads, depending on the scale of the client. And then somebody says, well, shouldn't we be doing like some TikTok videos?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, possibly, if we get to such a level that we've exhausted what we can extract from Google, which is almost never, right?
Yeah.
Probably all you're doing there is you're spreading resources. Now, if you're building branding, or you've got a lifestyle brand, again, in industries that I don't participate in, but there are times when some of those things make sense, or you get to such a level that you need branding. But again, very much needs to be aligned with objectives. So a lot of times, people, I think the two biggest problems with demand generation is people will spread their budgets too thin because they're trying too many things, or they will have an executive, and I see this over and over again, that has a particular channel that they enjoy and they want to see themselves in it, regardless of whether it produces. And again, you start to sort of drain off budget for essentially vanity, right?
Yeah. No, that's incredibly true. And yeah, I mean, it's stick to the simplistic, stick to what works, and just continue to grow and expand in that region.
Yeah. And if you see it stalling out, or you hitting some ceilings, then that's when you start
optimize
to that out. Yeah. Right.
Optimize, shift the ads, change the language. How are you communicating? Maybe there's opening it up into new, a new customer base that you never thought that existed. So to your point, it's looking at the data and really looking back to see, what's working and what is the patterns and the
Yeah.
shifts.
Well, you do have to be aware, and I think this is where marketers have to have to be competent and professional in their approach to watching out for the customer. Because all the way back in the internet bank, we were putting ads in newspapers, and then we
Yeah.
saw Google, and then we started like playing and testing in that, and then pretty soon, like, we didn't put ads in newspapers anymore, right? So you do have to watch for those sort of, and they happen, every probably 20 years, these cataclysmic sort of shifts in channels or platforms or consumer behavior. So you do have to be on guard for that, because it does happen, and you certainly don't want to be left in the in the newspapers when
Yeah,
nobody's
in the
looking anymore.
in the dust of the
Right, right,
recycling box down the hall.
right.
Um, I want to shift a little bit to AI, and I want to talk like twofold from just your background from espionage, but also from like the marketing standpoint. So let's start there. You've modernized lead systems and have adopted AI into strategies. Obviously, everybody thinks AI just happened yesterday, but
Yeah,
it's been going on for a long time.
yeah.
What tools or automations do you think are truly moving the needle today, and which are just hype? And we don't have to go through and name them, but it's obviously there is a lot that's happening, but it's how to kind of weed out the good from the bad. And there's obviously specific things like we can 10x your business with AI and so on and so forth, and that's like a
Right.
no.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are some categories that are super interesting, and some you probably heard of, and some you probably haven't. The one I'll lead with is probably the one that most people haven't heard of, and if you're at a scale of lead generation, and you have large sales teams and that sort of thing, um, this concept of predictive AI, a lot of people are not talking about, but this is probably the largest impact that I've seen with AI. That's just like you put it in the system and you do 10x or you do
Yeah.
20x something. And so what that sort of category of technology enables you to do is AI is very good at pattern recognition and looking for and predicting outcomes. So the simplest version of this that I heard from a professor a few years ago is that you could take all the statistics of NFL players, right? Probably tons of data, how fast they are, how many receptions they get, all these different factors. So he said AI can predict with machine learning um, who in that list of characters with all this data, if you just feed it height and weight, it
Yeah.
can tell you with about 80 to 90% probability who are the tight ends, right?
Mm.
So predictive AI, one of the kind of misnomers is that you need like massive data sets in order to more effectively predict, in our case, what leads are going to convert. So from the characteristics of the leads, first party data that's coming in, predictive AI is getting really good at predicting and scoring which leads are the ones you should be focusing on. And then furthermore, distributing them to the salespeople that have shown, based on the characteristics of that individual lead, the highest propensity to close it. Right. So there's some really interesting stuff in predictive AI and dropping those sorts of technologies inside of sales operations and kind of the lead generation, the marketing operation up front.
Hmm.
The second component, I think, unquestionably, is generative AI, where we're all talking about ChatGPT and large language models. This is impacting us in a couple of really interesting ways. So the obvious use case everybody's using is like, I can use these things to be more productive,
Yeah.
to produce more content. If you get sophisticated and you customize these, and we're doing a lot of this, we're actually building custom GPTs for clients, for
Yeah.
situations where, and that's helping us to increase productivity. But where I actually see the most impact is it's changing the SEO game. So again, the uninitiated are thinking, well, I'll just pump out more content. To some degree, you can. But the
Yeah.
reason that all of a sudden quality and quantity are important is because we're seeing an enormous explosion of what I call
Content.
surface area for searches.
Yeah.
So think of yourself as a consumer. You may still go to Google search, but you're probably also talking to your phone. You're going to ChatGPT. If you're doing a sophisticated purchase, like maybe you're planning your dream trip to Tuscany,
Yeah.
you might start now with ChatGPT and say, hey, I want to go to Tuscany. I have this rough amount of budget. I'd like to stay in places like this. Can you give me an itinerary and some hotel recommendations, or should I do an Airbnb? Like these more sophisticated things, same way with mortgage. Like, hey, I want to buy a house in a couple of years. I'm planning for that. Can you help me build a financial plan? And those citations and the LLMs are getting better. So you need to have your content inside of the large language models. And so now when we think about SEO, we're thinking about us optimizing for Google because
Mm-hmm.
Google's still a big consumer, but even its results are being sort of Gemini'd, if you will,
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
front end. But
Yeah.
we're also thinking about like, how can we make our content unique in
Yes.
such a way that the large language models probably haven't seen it yet? So
Yeah.
this is where stories become important, use cases, scenarios, proprietary data from our clients, infusing all of that into the content. And then we have to produce it at scale. We have to
Yeah.
produce it at an enormous scale because these large language models are literally consuming like at an insatiable rate.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
so that's the big one that I think a lot of people aren't thinking about as it concerns generative AI. The consumer is like where you might not like a thing. Like I even see it in my own activity. Like there are certain things I don't think about anymore. Like
Mm-hmm.
I just go to ChatGPT and start
Yeah.
the conversation,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
It's
So
almost like yesterday or like a month ago, what did we do with this? What did we do without this in essence, you know? I mean, it's really become
absolutely.
a part of a lot of people's lives today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, there's just, I think, and it's going through, I heard somebody describe it like this. There was a time in which all of a sudden you stopped thinking about certain things like where you're going to go to eat dinner and you
Yeah.
just Googled it. And now we're kind of going to the thing is like, will we use Expedia and Orbitz to plan our trip,
Trips.
or will we just
Yeah.
go to ChatGPT and ask it to plan the whole thing for us? So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's I feel like ChatGPT and the large language models um, is like the Google moment,
Yeah.
right? But it's probably larger because it's not just marketing.
Yeah.
It's it's
It's
the
beyond.
productivity
Yeah.
inside of our organizations, what we do, how we do content, reshaping a whole bunch of like activities that we do as an
Mm-hmm.
agency,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Which is, QAI agents that are becoming a lot smarter and more, we're developing more of them like over time that are going to take over any kind of job that basically takes information and plugs it into a database. I mean,
yeah,
that's going to be completely,
yeah,
gone, and AI agents will be able to support that. And what you talk about, agility to market, right?
yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, and I think, and a lot of people are afraid of this, right? So, but to some degree, like what I see happening is this commoditizing the sort of repeatable, for some people like us, probably mind numbing execution that's been commoditized. But the creativity on the input side and the output side, like it gives us an enormous amount of extra margin
yeah.
in our day and in our head to be a lot more creative. So I do actually expect marketing and consumer experiences to get a lot more interesting because we just have more headspace
Yeah.
to be more creative.
No, I completely agree. So, from the standpoint of your past life in the Air Force and the movement of AI, and listen, I think the data shows that, from what I've heard from some of the podcasts that I've listened to, is that there is a lot of positive, right? I think
Yeah.
we still don't know the data on the darker side
Yeah.
of, where AI can lead to, what is happening with some of that, today. But talk to us a little bit about that darker side, just
Yeah.
based on, your history of, espionage and all that kind of stuff. I'm intrigued from your point of view, just because of your
Yeah.
background.
Yeah. You know, So ultimately, I have great faith and belief in humanity
Yes.
to kind of navigate these things. But there will be moments where we're going to have some scary scenarios
Yeah.
because there is an autonomy. I think it's important to still have a human in the middle to kind of look at what's going on and have a
Yeah.
conversation. Um, the people like Sam Altman and company who are building these things are going to have to figure out, because we don't have the visibility, right? Are going to have to figure out how to give AI guardrails, because it is getting really interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
in a sense, it is thinking, it is making autonomous decisions. Even as you use it to kind of, like, if you're doing content or you're having to think through a campaign strategy or something like that, I encourage you to go to like ChatGPT, pay for everybody should have a paid subscription to at least one of these things. Go into the O4 model or whatever, the O
Mm-hmm.
models, which
Mm-hmm.
are a
Mm-hmm.
thinking model,
Mm-hmm.
and they've done a really good job of letting you watch it think, and just to watch that logic move through
Yeah.
will either scare you or really
True.
intrigue you. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, um, I think it's important for all of us that are using this not to put our heads in the sand and hope that it'll go away, or
Yeah.
hope that our jobs will be the same as they are today. You have to dig in there. You have to figure it out. You have to understand it. If you're going to still be relevant, you got to dig into this thing, and you got to educate yourself when you're going through these moments. Again, let's just take Google. When Google burst on the scene and pay-per-click became a thing, probably for, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, there was a lot of innovation and things changing.
Yeah.
And then for the last 10 years, like, yeah, there's been some incremental stuff, but you could kind of, like, if you're a PPC manager or you're a Facebook ad manager, like, you've probably pretty much been sitting on your hands for 10 years, right? Because,
Yeah.
like, those things are baked in. So I would encourage people, if you want to be relevant, you know that this is the early days and this thing is going to change rapidly.
Yeah.
And it's also a huge, again, I don't get too fearful, but I think it's a huge differentiator. It's a huge advantage if you're moving forward with this, because the early movers always win, right?
Yes. Yes.
Always win, because you're going to be the
Yes.
first in, you're going to build the most reputation, you're going to build the biggest skill set.
Yes.
So I would encourage people to dive in, pay attention, look around, think ethically, about what you're doing, and just know we're going to have a couple of not so pleasant moments, but
Yeah. Yeah.
ultimately, I don't think we're looking for an extinction event yet. So
Yeah.
I'm not in that camp. But it is, as you start to work with it, I tell people all the time, I use it as a colleague, right? So
Yes, I do too.
that's what I think of it as, and I think
Yes.
that's the way we should treat it, and I think we should sort of have the same levels of accountability that we would have on a colleague.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we're almost in a time, if we think about like the internet boom and how so many companies just flourished and, new companies came out and, people were just making a ton of money. We're back there again where
Yeah,
we're at another phase that, the inventors are going to invent while utilizing this platform, and the rich are going to get richer, or the inventors are going to really kind of flourish and come through into the market. So it's not a choice of, like you said, put your head in the sand and hope it goes away. This is a movement that's happening, and you will fall behind
yeah,
if you're not picking up on it somehow,
yeah,
somewhere, and looking at how you can become better at your job with a supplemental understanding of how you're making things more speed and agility into market just based on what you've been doing. Because ultimately, the project managers, other types of marketers and so on and so forth that know how to utilize AI in conjunction with how they're working are the ones that are going to win and at least have a longer longevity in market.
yeah, for sure. I'll kind of give you maybe a personal story of seeing this. So both my sons, my two older sons, are software engineers, and, like, there was a moment when they came out of college that, like, they couldn't hire enough of them, and then
Yeah.
literally overnight, there is pressure on them. And so, like, my grand theory, if you're, like, trying to figure out where you need to end up,
Yeah.
anybody who earns a living putting their fingers on a keyboard
Yeah.
should figure out how to move up to a more creative level of interaction, because those people, AI, will do all of the typing, whether you're
Yeah.
writing content or
Oh,
you're
yeah.
writing code. Even Altman will tell you, I watched an interview with him. He's like, well, a lot of our open AI code is written by AI, right?
Itself. Yeah.
So like that's been my delineator, to just give people like a tangible thing to think about.
Yeah.
If you earn a living putting your fingers to a keyboard, you should probably start to be thinking about how you change what you do.
Yeah. No, totally. Bill, this has been so, so, so insightful and super informative. And, you and I could go on for another hour for
Sure.
sure. But I do want to, I always do this with some of my, with everyone, I do, fireside questions. So whatever comes to mind, just answer it and we'll roll through it.
Okay.
What's one daily habit you can't live without?
Going to the gym. That's
I
my
love it.
piece. That's my piece in the morning. I like to
It's your
plug my earphones
meditation.
in. Yep, that's my meditation, literally.
Love it. Love it. Biggest lesson you've learned from failure?
To the people who endure and just keep pushing forward, and kind of I'll mess this up. It's like fate more, I think, or something like that.
Yes. Yes.
That Ryan Holiday says, just
Yes.
embracing what's in front of you.
Yeah.
I always told my
Amor
kids,
fati.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
You did it
Yeah.
better.
Fate. It's that our fate
Yeah,
is
just
written.
accepting fate. I tell my kids
Yes.
all the time, don't think about what's happened or what's got you there in those
Yes.
moments. Just look at like what you've got and what you're going to make out of that. So that's a big
I
thing for
love
me.
that. I love that. If nobody has picked up the book, Ryan Holiday, definitely a read.
Yes.
If you could write a message on a billboard for every founder to see, what would it say?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, I would say probably keep iterating. Keep iterating, because you'll find the right fit. If you've got the passion to be an entrepreneur, a founder, you will. Don't try to over strategize it, overthink it. Literally, just execution like is worshipped in those early days. So just keep iterating. You'll find the right product or service. You just got to keep your feet moving. It's kind of like a running back going through the line. They
Oh,
always
I
tell you,
love that.
yeah, they always
It's a
tell
good
you,
analogy.
yeah, you're going to hit that wall, but if you keep your
Yeah.
legs moving, you will probably, get a couple extra yards. So keep
You'll
the legs
hit the
moving.
wall or you're going to hit your opponent on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. Keep those legs chopping. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Bill, this has been super great. To the audience, we've got all of Bill's information linked below in terms of how to find him, his companies, and so on. So please definitely go and check that out and get in touch. I appreciate your time, Bill.
Oh, I loved it. It was excellent.
Thank you.